So this is almost a follow-up to my last video. Completely unintentional, but I've noted a lot of talk about this topic following the DK64 stream events. So I've been following these assholes for years, and there are many trans allies out there who aren't as well studied as me, so I'm going to do some philosophizing here. And we're going to study what unites those who have begun to self-identify as gender-critical feminists, and the far right, the Gamergaters, the Religious Right, the Heritage Foundation, who all ally together against the trans community. If you were among the few to see my first video, before HBomberGuy's DK64 stream, you might have noticed a lot of the tweets from Graham Linehan, Walnut Sock Puppet, actually mirrored or could have been directly lifted from Aiden Paladin's video that I rebutted in December. These two sources, a far right and ostensibly a far left source, are drawing from the same resources. But why? Well, I'm not going to rebut these positions because A, I've already done that, and that's in the other video, and B, the rebut is summed up as science has proven transgender people exist, medical professionals cannot force children to gender-conforming therapies, that's malpractice, we're just gonna let that go, and take their arguments at face value to better understand them. This video is more about the philosophy than it's getting into the weeds. So let's lay out the areas that gender criticals and the alt-right align on. The first is that trans women are men. Trans women will always be men, no matter their decisions, and letting them into all women's spaces, such as bathrooms, shelters, or access to women's health services, is a predatory, irresponsible act. The second is that the greater trend of young trans men in the past 20 years, these people are united in their belief that young natal females being treated for gender dysphoria are just tomboys who are gay and are being unfairly targeted by medical professionals for profit? This was Graham's primary complaint against the mermaid charity, despite the fact Mermaids doesn't prescribe drugs. It's important to note that they'll occasionally flip these arguments, telling a trans man he will always be a woman as a way to insult them, for instance, but this is usually only when confronted. When given the freedom to say what they want, what's important, and what's on their minds, you will notice them default to these two primary positions in the current discourse. Another minor point is that they believe in the term cis as denoting the opposite of trans is a slur. And, ironically, despite calling themselves gender critical, they tend to believe men and women are etched in from birth based on their genitals, yet also believe that gender cannot be self-understood, only affirmed by the group, which goes hand in hand with their other belief that gender is a social construct. This is the one place where gender-critical feminists disagree with the gender-critical alt-right, who believe the biological differences are so inherent that they dictate social roles, but we'll see why the end result is basically the same. So why does this movement exist? It's actually quite simple when you adopt a single postulate. These people, the Gamergaters, the incels, the gender-critical feminists, they inherently believe that women are inferior to men. This is the root cause of the conflict. Let's break their ideas down. Let's empathize a bit. I'm going to be intentionally misgendering a bit here because we're breaking these arguments down from their point of view. But I assure you, this is not done of malice. I just want to frame this as a gender-critical person would do in a given argument. Let's hop around a bit and study that part about young trans boys first. The idea here is that, well, A, these aren't trans boys, they're women, even though we've scientifically established that their neural structure says otherwise, but for the sake of their argument, let's assume they are just young girls. They're just masculine-presenting gay girls falling to peer pressure. But why is it always trans boys? Why don't they worry about the trans girls to the same degree? If these young girls are being manipulated, can't it be the same of the young boys who want to be women? The fact here is that this is just internalized penis envy in a big way. See, young boys are allowed to choose to be women. They're still wrong, they're doing it as a predation, but they're still allowed to choose it because boys are important. Boys are autonomous. Boys have agency. But young girls don't. It's natural for a young girl to want to be a man. It's self-evident that in a society where men are better than women, that she just wants to be a man. She's not allowed to choose to be a man like a young boy is allowed to choose to be a woman, because she is inherently upgrading. The little boy who wants to be a girl, he's just downgrading, he's sandbagging. It's still silly to these people, but if he wants to handicap himself, that's his prerogative. Young girls are seen as tomboys because masculine is the default. Young women who imagine themselves as men, that's inexcusable, because their uterus is the most important organ of their bodies. Feminism is defined by the uterus. Women's rights, women's suffrage, women's health care is defined by the uterus, and as women, they are more vulnerable than men. They require more protection than men. They need more safeguarding than men. A young boy who is predated upon by the transgender community is sad, but it's something he should have known better for. The young girls who go to gender clinics, however, they are the weak and the frail that can't operate for themselves. Never mind that these arguments are almost exclusively about minors who have parents who are responsible for all the medical decisions they make. Bringing this around to the first point, that men transitioning to women is an act of predation, our postulate also explains this point away. A man can choose to present feminine. That isn't the problem here. And the trans men aren't being attacked for invading men's spaces because they are women and thus weak. But no man would willingly become a woman except as an act of sexual deviance. Why would he? His natal sex is the superior sex. He earns more money, he has more media representation, he has the penis. He is just better advantaged in every way than his female counterparts of the same race. And nothing about a man dressing as a woman is wrong. You'll note in the gender-critical talking points that this is never the cause. On the contrary, when it comes to trans women, quite often these points are washed over with, I think people should be allowed to do what they want. But to them, this is cross-dressing. Everything, from the clothes to the hormones to the genital surgeries, this is all just elaborate cross-dressing. Because a man has the power to choose to express his gender, he has that right and agency. What they do concern themselves with is that when trans women might be in female spaces, cis women must be protected, they must be guarded because they are inherently weak and frail. This ties into the West's traditional problems with homosexuality. Look at any anti-homosexual rant from the glory days of gay marriage arguments, especially one with religious connotations, and I guarantee you that among those religious bents, the word gay, homosexual, and sodomy will be used interchangeably at some point. Why? Because when it comes to being gay, it comes back to that issue of male agency. Lesbians are a smaller fish to fry because they are seen as rejecting men. Something bad happened, and they are just turned off. Lesbians are straight women who are so frigid they just choose sex with women now. But gay men, they actively choose men, and their agency, their ability to choose, is what makes them the target of so much more stigma in nations where lesbian porn is the most consumed adult entertainment. This postulate is the same root cause. Males have agency, females do not. Gender-critical feminists believe wholeheartedly that there are immutable differences between men and women, and that there is a gender binary. But they also know that sexism is bad, but they themselves, they feel, are good people. If I am a good person, I cannot be sexist. Thus, I am a feminist. So their feminism expresses itself not as a tool to promote equality between the genders, but as a way of chivalrously protecting women from men. That in order to have equal women with men, the women must have a constant upward push to balance the scale. This is why someone like Graham Linehan can say something like, women are important, and then turn around and call a woman a cunt. He doesn't really believe women are equal to men. He believes that they must be protected from bad men. If women are protected from the asshole men, then they will naturally take their place in the female half of the globe, while he, in his shining armor, can protect her as a nice guy. This doesn't remind you of anyone, does it? But let's address that one point of difference. That gender is a social construct, even if it contradicts the other argument they want to make. Well, that would be a mistake to fall for the alt-right tactics of shifting the goalposts. See, the idea that gender is a social construct, That's been disproven already by science. That's been disproven for 50 years. Ask John Money how well his theory that gender is a social construct went. Because it's the same flaw baked into the premise. Science knows transgender people exist. That's quantifiable and indisputable at this point. If these people cared about science, they would accept the most basic premise about transgender people, that research already exists about them. And again, as I pointed out in Aiden's video, if there were a whole bunch of cisgender kids being thrown into the transgender pool, the patterns of psychopathology that have been observed in these youth pools would be thrown off, but they aren't. So if you pretend that gender is something made up in the minds of apes, you can then define a woman as a uterus. A woman is now reduced to her ability to menstruate. A woman is reduced to her ability to bear children. And this is what unites gender-critical feminists with the alt-right. At the core of what they believe is the same thing. Now, there is one other argument, that women are women because they were socialized as women in their formative years. But then, why do they hate transgender youth? Surely if someone is socialized as a boy for the first 4 years of their life, but then lives their life as a girl for the next 14, surely the social conditioning as a girl would be far more important. But that isn't how these people see it, because ultimately they can't accept that you aren't defined by your genitals. Because if transgender people exist, that means gender is something to think about. But if you can deny it, then it's not a problem, and these people will deny the truth just as readily as any neo-Nazi. Jesus himself could descend from on high. He could land right in front of Graham Linehan, materialize 2 goblets of wine, and shout, "Trans rights," in Graham's face, and Graham's only response would be to call him a misogynist. Because if gender exists as science says it does, then it's something they can't control, and it's different. Okay, that's all we really want to say on this subject. You know, these people aren't worth the time of day, but hopefully you've learned something with which to pierce their veil of self-deception. Not sure what the next video will be, but I'm going to try my hardest to make it something outside the gender studies wheelhouse, but who knows where inspiration will strike. See you then.